Votaw is a professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. She has a degree in psychology as well as a degree in music education. She came to the Missouri Scholars Academy for a double header on the physiology of psychology and the psychology of death, what happens when you are reminded of your own death. I attended both and was allowed an interview afterwards.
When were you first interested in psychology?
Oh, so I had a really good psychology teacher in high school. I came from a small high school, so she taught lots of different social sciences, but it was just a one quarter, maybe a one semester course in high school, and I just really took to it. It came kind of easily and was just really interesting, and I got more into the papers that we were writing for that class. I thought, well, if I like it, I should probably stick with it, and maybe eventually someone will give me a job, and eventually they did, but it was Mrs. Henry's psychology class, senior year of high school.
Death has always fascinated Western cultures. What about it fascinates you?
Good question. So I have kind of a personal answer and more of an academic answer. So the academic answer is really what I talked about in my talk tonight, that I am interested in the effects of thinking on death, particularly in maybe like really Western cultures where we are interested in it, but we kind of repress it. And so seeing what are the effects of that on individual behaviors and thoughts, and especially when we step back and look at how the group behaves, that's what I'm most interested in then. So we talked about, for example, it felt a little coded, but I at least interpreted the gentleman who's sitting up here when he was talking about the effects after, I thought he was talking about after 9/11 and how our country has responded to people of Arab descent. That's really interesting to me as a potential explanation for otherwise baffling behaviors. Personally, I've always, as long as I can remember, kind of been interested in the macabre. As a young kid, I remember reading my mom's Unsolved Mysteries, like big picture book, and I think for that, it really ultimately comes down to a way of handling anxiety. For me, I don't have like crippling anxiety, but I feel better knowing that I could escape a dangerous situation if I have read about and examined and watched videos of those dangerous situations. And so I kind of seek them out in that way. But I think ultimately it comes down to understanding what ultimately is the hardest thing in the world to understand, is like ceasing to exist.
Low points or points where you doubted yourself?
So, just in general?
In general, for your career? Okay. All of the above?
Yeah. So I think, let me talk slowly and think it out. So I think as someone who's generally, usually in a pretty bright, involving situations, I think I'm a relatively smart individual. I often find myself surrounded by other bright individuals, and I think that it's really easy to get caught up in feelings of imposter syndrome. So I've had that a lot in my life. In academics, whenever I was an undergraduate and I knew I wanted to go to graduate school because I knew I wanted to teach, and I needed a PhD for that, and you just hear about how competitive it is, and you think, ooh, I'm not good enough, I'm not that competitive. Turns out I was good enough. I got into one school and it was great. It was a great fit. Then once you're in graduate school, and it's just always comparing yourself to other people who are very high achieving. As they're publishing more, or they understand statistics better, or they remember different theories better, whatever it might be. It's a very, even in my experience at St. Louis University, that ultimately was really positive. It still is just by nature a competitive thing. So there you have imposter syndrome. Now, as a teacher at UMSL, I still think, who gave me this job? Why was I the one chosen? And I think at MSA, honestly, is a place, where you're so surrounded by just the brightest, most interesting people, and you think, ooh, I'm not that interesting. But this isn't quite what you asked, but I would still encourage, those are all times, a little on the vague side, but true times when I've, doubted. I guess I would say like almost every day I doubt myself, but it's because I choose to grow by continuing to surround myself by people to challenge and grow up. So like almost every day, I continue to think, oh, someone's gonna find out about me. But a lot of that is a choice to surround myself just by really inspiring, interesting, motivated, high-achieving individuals.
High points.
Okay. So this might sound like I'm just saying this because I'm here, but truly I feel like the best version of myself was when I was an RA at MSA. I really, really thrived there. Because again, it's kind of what I was talking about. Of course, there was like some like, ooh, everybody's more interesting than me, or smarter than me, but more it's just a chance to be entirely immersed with these just crazy, bright and sharp individuals, and they bring you up. So that absolutely was a high point for me. I hope I didn't peak at like 22, but that was the third year that I was an RA was probably the best 3 weeks of my life. Besides that, I think a high point has just been that my position where I teach now is a very good fit. I get to talk to people about psychology all day. My classes are all discussion based, so the students come into the classroom with their experiences and takes on it, and I get to just kind of lead discussion. I get to be authentic and kind of build a community. I'm a very enthusiastic individual, and I get to authentically be enthusiastic with them. So it's kind of a prolonged high point, but that continues to be a high point.
How has psychology changed your worldview and how you view people?
Good. That's a good question. So I don't know which came first, but I feel like I was always drawn to the sort of person because so a person does a behavior and there are witnesses to it, and they try to explain that behavior. Why would that person do that? And there are people very close in my life who often tend to say, like, what's wrong with that person? Why would they do that? Like, I would never do that, and make it very about the individual. So, like, internal attributions, something about that person's personality. I think I was drawn to psychology, and then, like, further, like, Alice down the hole or something, just, like, went deeper and deeper and deeper into social psychology that looks at behavior and says what external factors can explain that behavior. So it really has changed my worldview in a really significant, I think irreversible sort of way, that I know sometimes people are just being jerks and that is their personality and that's it, but a lot of times what I'm interested in is what are the external factors that could explain this. What beyond their personality could lead any person to behave that way. And that's usually how I approach situations now.
Music and psychology are an interesting combination. As someone who is a former musician and interested in psychology, how does that work?
I wish I had a better answer. So I know that there is like research on music and psychology. I personally know less about that. I even know that even in terms of treatment, like music therapy is an option. I don't know if this really is a great answer, but music for me, I don't play music anymore, it's kind of sad. But I still find for me, music is the closest that I personally have to experiences that are bigger than myself. So whenever I listen to very moving music, classical music or a movie score, it is the closest that I have to just feeling like connected to everything and everyone that's ever been. It's like the closest I have personally to like a spiritual movement. I I don't really know how that ties to psychology necessarily, but again, maybe just something about the humanity of both of the fields. You know, again, I'm just kind of maybe just drawn to that as a person. It's a good question.
Words of advice for scholars.
Oh, let me think and come up with something really good. Okay. Here's my words of advice for scholars. And it comes from a place that I see many of you in the future. I teach college students. Most of them are 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And the biggest thing, they're also, many of them are like you, that they truly are bright, gifted, motivated, achieving like you do. The biggest thing that I see is that whenever things have maybe been easy, academically or socially or personally, that it's really hard to fail. And so my words of advice to scholars would be that like that is when the growth happens. To truly to try new things and be okay just being okay at something, or being okay sucking at something. And if it's something that still interests you, carrying on, or being like, no, this isn't for me. But you get to be the one to make that call versus just being like, well, I wasn't good at this, so I won't do it anymore. I think the biggest thing that I see is just that resilience and openness, honestly, openness to failure and experimentation, even if it's hard, even if you're not the best person at it. I think just when I see people who are used to maybe being the best, that can really be a challenge. So I would want to encourage you to continue to take the sort of attitudes that you've had here, where it's a place where you can't fail and you can experiment and grow and continue to have that mindset once you leave the academy. And you can be the leader in that and bring others out of cynicism, like into growth with you.